You are listening to Personalization Outbreak, a podcast about the collapse of traditional corporate standards in today's more personalized world. I'm Llopis. I'm a leadership strategist, author, contributor to Forbes, and founder of the Leadership in the Age of Personalization movement. On this show, I'm interviewing executives across multiple sectors to find out how the balance between standardization and personalization can exist. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Personalization Outbreak Podcast. Healthcare was built on a foundation of compassion, service, and human connection. Yet today, we face a sobering reality. Patients often feel reduced to numbers. Healthcare professionals, once driven by passion and purpose, are now worn thin by burnout. And while technology has certainly given us incredible tools, it's also created new barriers, threatening the human touch that should define care. See, these challenges are deeply personal, affecting the lives of both those who give care and those who receive it. But amidst these struggles lies a profound opportunity. Change is possible, and the path forward begins with bold, empathetic leadership that puts humanity back at the center of healthcare. Our guest today is someone who has devoted more than 30 years to leading this kind of transformation. Dr. Scott Wolf is a physician executive with a remarkable commitment to reshaping how we deliver care and lead change in the healthcare industry. Now, before I bring Scott on, I want just to let you know the kind of person that he is. Scott is not just dedicated to the healthcare industry. He's truly dedicated to humanity in doing good for others. Now, you hear that a lot, doing good for others, but this is a different type of individual. Scott is someone that actually wants to see you. He wants to know you. He wants to know what he can do for you and bring opportunities to you both professionally and personally. He's a very unique individual that is no longer practicing, but he serves as a consultant now. But I'll tell you something. He's the type of person that should jump right back in and practice because he's the type of leader that this industry needs. Scott, I know you didn't expect me to share that, but I want to thank you for being here, my friend. You're really a special individual. I'm honored to call you my friend, and thanks for being on the show.
Oh, Glenn, the thanks are all mine, and thank you for that incredible introduction. But I always enjoy our conversations, and I also want to thank you for continually to provide the forum for us to have these types of dialogue, because they're so, as we'll talk about today, they're so critically important in today's healthcare environment.
Well, thanks, and we'll get into this, and we'll have some fun with it too. And I know that they're heavy topics, but I think, as you know, we have to help people see that turning this around is not an impossibility. And we have to recognize that we're dealing now with an accumulation of the decisions that we made and an accumulation of the decisions we didn't make. And it's not about placing blame or pointing fingers. It's about identifying what can we do now to interrupt and pivot to a better place in healthcare for not just our patients and their families, but our employees now who are consumers and have choices. So to get this started, I'd really like to frame our conversation with a metaphor. And I know I've shared this with you, Scott, but for our audience, a business, a strategy, or even an initiative often begins with noble intentions. I really do believe that. I mean, yeah, there are select few, but I really believe that the intention is to do good, but like a ship setting out towards a clear destination, right? But over time, what happens? External forces like financial pressures and bureaucracy or competing priorities can pull it off course. In other words, without a compass of purpose, it drifts, losing sight of its original destination. When you hear that, Scott, how do you translate that to what we're experiencing in healthcare?
Well, it's so relevant, Glenn, and I love your analogy. When you think back, and I'll make it personal. When I first went into healthcare, the foundations of healthcare were really rooted in in very sacred tenets, right? Preserving life, taking care of the vulnerable and those most in need, relieving suffering, and promoting well-being. Those were sort of the foundational tenets that we all went into healthcare to pursue. That relationship with your patients. There's no occupation out there, Glenn, where a person can walk into your space and within seconds share their most personal and intimate issues with you within seconds of knowing you, and that's a sacred bond that we need to preserve. And to in keeping to your analogy, today we still wake up to that moral compass, right? Our compass, our direction around those foundational principles. But as you said, and to keep with the analogy, we are now faced with tremendous headwinds, financial challenges and struggles. Organizations are constantly battling meeting their budgets and balancing revenue with the growing expenses. We have a workforce challenge that I'm sure we'll talk about, where people across the industry are leaving. Physicians, nurses, ancillary staff, they're leaving in unprecedented numbers. Supply chain, physician and nursing burnout. All of these headwinds are coming together and clashing, if you would, with the direction of healthcare and deviating it away, if you would, from those very sacred foundational principles. And so, the question is, how do we right the ship, if you would, to your analogy, and how do we sort of slowly turn the tides back to where we can maintain that dignity, if you would, in healthcare, and that passion that unfortunately we're seeing is leaving in many of our healthcare providers today.
Well, let's go back to dignity. How do you define dignity in healthcare? And what opportunities do you see to restore it where it's been lost?
Well, I mean, in its basic sense, Glenn, dignity is when people are treated, with respect, with empathy, with care, with passion, with compassion. And when people lose that sense of dignity, it has an impact on the outcomes of their performance. And so, when you have nurses in the hospitals that feel that they don't have the necessary tools and ability to care for their patients with dignity, with care and compassion, they lose that sense amongst themselves. They lose that sense of pride. They lose that sense of worth. And really, that's what dignity is. It's having that sense of worth, and that you're truly, you have meaning and you have purpose. And that's so important when, because behind all the financial challenges, underneath, the workforce issues and the supply chain issues, and believe me, I get it as now a consultant, but as as a healthcare leader of an organization, I get the fiduciary responsibilities we have. I understand the operational efficiencies that we need to drive, for. But below all of that is that relationship between you and a patient and their loved ones. And that's where the importance of dignity needs to really be sacred.
God, I have to ask this question. But when I hear you say that, I believe it. I believe you. It's clear to me. But when we're in times of volatility and uncertainty, and a lot of it's very ambiguous,
Mhm.
isn't it more strategic to confront this challenge rather than almost feel as if there's a narrative out there that makes it sound like everything's okay? I mean, we have this tendency, as you know, in healthcare to um, reward a lot of things. I mean, you go on LinkedIn, there's another top 50 list. There's this leader that got recognized. You would think that the industry is flourishing. And I'm not saying that there aren't success stories and we shouldn't recognize them. But when you look at it on a macro sense, I almost feel that we're hiding some of the truths that you're revealing. I don't know. Any comments on that? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm trying to speak to those that are thinking the same thing that I've just shared with you, but do not dare to say.
Sure. Yeah. Glenn, look, when you talk to healthcare leaders today, and I believe, I travel the country, speaking with leaders all the time, and they'll all be, willing and they're ready, able to identify the issues and the challenges that they face. I think from, in my perspective, the challenge is we have to become it to your earlier question. It's very easy to remain in your lane, right? It's very easy to remain, in and do what's comfortable. But I read once, a quote where somebody said we have to become comfortable becoming more uncomfortable. And I think as a group of leaders, we have to, what I refer to as, stop admiring the problem. And we have to be bold enough to not only recognize, but admit that change is not an option, that it's actually an imperative. Because clearly, when you look at the trajectory of healthcare, from a financial perspective, from a quality perspective, from a workforce perspective, we have tremendous opportunities for improvement. But it takes the ability to not only recognize the problem, but then be bold enough to really, and have the courage, if you would, to be uncomfortable, and begin to incrementally create opportunities for that change to have an impact.
Well, look, you've heard me say this before. Opportunities are everywhere, yet few have eyes to see them. What's making it difficult, and what is the opportunity to help people see more of the opportunities?
Well, I think what's making it difficult is, those of us in healthcare today are very much challenged by the issues we identified. The expense of delivering healthcare continues to rise, yet reimbursements for your services remain flat or even declining. We're having tremendous challenges with workforce and maintaining engagement of our workforce, not only in numbers but in years of experience. When you look at nursing units today and you see, the nurses that are leaving, or physicians that are leaving, the years of institutional knowledge and experience that is going with them is irreplaceable. We're losing those mentors for our new up and coming leaders to come forward, and having those leaders who, as we've talked about in the past, lead with legacy, leading to leave a legacy. So I think the headwinds are creating such a challenge that it takes every ounce of our energy to just overcome those day-to-day operational issues, making sure that our units are staffed, making sure that we're maximizing our revenue, doing everything we can to remove the administrative waste that takes us away from the bedside, that takes us away from that personal opportunity that we have with patients. When you walk into a physician's office now, unfortunately, we're head down in our computers, with the requirements for EMR and documentation, as opposed to, looking at your patient in the eye, and having that conversation about what their problems that they're facing. And so I think, in short, I think we just have to continue to, optimize, what we're doing today, but always have that eye for how do we improve and innovate for tomorrow.
So, what are the opportunities to innovate for tomorrow?
Well, I mean, I think
Let's just take some baby steps. What are maybe two or three things that can get us to shift from, this transactional tactical mindset to more of one that starts building momentum in areas that maybe we haven't had time to consider?
Sure. So, I think one paramount issue is really doing what we can to remove the administrative waste and barriers to maximize our time with our patients. And what I mean by that, we have to provide opportunities for people to practice at the very tops of their license. And so how do we do that? Well, one, I think, I'm very, very excited about what's happening in the world of digital transformation and AI, and but how do we leverage AI to not replace, but to support, our providers and our caregivers in helping them, again, practice at the tops of their license. So how do we limit the administrative burden by leveraging digital technology, AI, machine learning? One of the things that I'm most excited about, especially in the area of maintaining that relationship with your patients, is AI-driven scribes. So that as you're having a conversation with your patient, there's an AI scribe in the background that's actually documenting your conversation and then synthesizes a very, very comprehensive and accurate note so that instead of focusing on your keyboard, you're actually able to have face-to-face conversation with your patient. And that allows, again, that enhances that relationship with your patient. Similarly, on the inpatient, side, how do we allow our nurses to spend more time at the bedside and bring in technology that allows them to practice top of license and relieve themselves of that administrative burden and allow them to sit at the bedside? Pull a chair up to the patient's bed, have an eye-to-eye conversation with them, because their perception of that experience will increase tenfold. There have been studies that show when you sit at the bedside of a patient, you can spend the exact same amount of time, but the perception is that you've spent 2 or 3 times more time with them because you simply sat next to them and engaged with them, hold their hands, really, really, be present. So in short, one of the first steps is to leverage our technology, leverage our digital, the explosion in digital transformation, but do it to support, not replace, the human element. A bot per se is always going to be challenged to replicate the human touch, that we expect.
So, how about some of the barriers right now? How do we break these barriers to ensure that we deliver patient-centered care and improve the overall experience? I mean, I know you touched on a few of them, but is there any other barrier that you think is one that we're still neglecting?
Well, I think one is at the level of just engagement, right? And so, I think, transformational leaders are ones that lead where they're inclusive, they're engaging, they respect the contributions of everybody on their team from the C-suite down to the bedside. One example, if I may, just give you is, I used to have Wednesday mornings were meeting free mornings where the entire executive team would go and round on all the units with the directors and the bedside nurses, and we'd have those conversations about what are their barriers, what are barriers that we as an executive team can remove for you to allow you to practice top of license. So one of the things to do is just go out and listen, and hear directly from the people who are at the point of care, and making and do create a catalog of issues that you can, as a leader, can help address and remove those barriers to allow them to be more engaged with their patients, to allow them to be more engaged with one another. I think another barrier that we can look at is really leveraging the multidisciplinary team approach to patient care. No one can do everything for everybody, and yet, but if we leverage the resources of an entire team and really focus on bringing those team resources around the betterment of care for that patient, the outcomes will be demonstrably better. And
You
the
know, go ahead, Scott. I'm sorry.
no,
Go
and
ahead.
the overall burden on the individual will be shared across an entire team.
You know what I've heard you say is that we have to stop being more tribal and start being more human. And what I also heard you say is that we need to start becoming more aware that these historical standards that we have for patient-centered care need to be reevaluated because everything you're talking about is moving us more towards a personalized experience. But when you're limited or feeling trapped that you could only do certain things because that's the way we've always done them or that's what we're being rewarded for, it takes us away from what matters to the patient and makes it more about what matters to us as an institution. That's what I'm getting from you. How am I doing with that?
No, you're spot on, Glenn. But it's not easy. It's not an easy transition. But to your point, if we just take baby steps, and the first step is just recognize it. recognize that it's a problem, not admire the problem, but recognize that there's an opportunity to do things differently, and then engage your team, your collective, and begin to have conversations around, okay, how can we do things differently, but still be mindful, Glenn. We still always have to be mindful that we have responsibilities and accountabilities from fiscal performance, from operational performance, from regulatory and compliance performance. I mean, those parameters and those guidelines are in place purposely so that the care we're delivering is of high quality, is safe. But we have to figure out how do we work within those parameters, but still shift from the way we've always done it, like you said, to what are the possibilities of doing it differently.
As someone who's been a CEO of a healthcare system, Scott, let me really pull back the layers here.
Sure.
How many people uh, that are involved in patient care truly understand the financial model? I mean, because we can say, oh, we have to have fiscal responsibility, we have a fiduciary duty, and I get that at a macro level. But how many nurses do you actually think, or any caregiver understands how the organization makes money and how it loses money?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I would think, just using common sense, if I understood those variables, I don't have to be told that I can't do X, Y, and Z because of the financial impact. I would make better decisions. I would make more common sense decisions by understanding their implications before I'm being told to, which then leads to this negative well-being and leads to all this burnout. I mean, how much should people really know?
Sure.
And do you think that there's a benefit for knowing?
Yeah. So I mean, the short answer is, not a lot of people truly understand. I mean, look, healthcare finance is incredibly complicated, and it gets more and more complex, every day when you think about, reimbursements and different payer, mix between Medicare and Medicaid and commercial and self-pay, and those who, unfortunately are uninsured or underinsured. The complexities of healthcare finance are ever growing. And so to your question, no, not many have that level of understanding. But what's important, though, Glenn, is that the expectation shouldn't be that they completely understand the complexities of hospital finance, but there should be an accountability and a recognition of how they can do things optimally, more efficiently, more effectively. If I can, let me tell you a story. I was doing rounds one day, and one of the hospital transporters on the team, he and I would meet for coffee, and he was excited one day because he said to me, he said, "Dr. Wolf, I want you to know, yesterday I got all my patients to their radiology exams on time." And I said, "Tony, that's great." I said, "But so why are you excited about it?" And he said to me, because this was at a time where we were really focused on patient flow and throughput, and making sure that patients didn't have to stay in the hospital longer than they had to, because, as you know, every day longer that a patient stays, not only is it a financial burden, but there's a
Yeah, of
quality risk. So
course.
I said, "Tony, why are you so excited about that?" And he said, "Because, Dr. Wolf, I feel that because I got my patients to their radiology exams on time, that nobody had to stay in the hospital longer because of the delay." And in I say that, Glenn, because to your question, does everybody need to understand the complexities of hospital finance? No. But they should understand, how do they contribute to the overall operations of a hospital, and how that their little domain, their ownership of their area, impacts patient care. Right. So I don't pretend to think that everybody should understand, a spreadsheet and a complicated, profit and
Mhm.
loss statement. But I do think that there's value in people understanding how they contribute to the overall performance of an organization. It's like being a business owner. right? It's we want them to own their business. We want them to have pride. Getting back to our earlier discussion around dignity, have pride in the work that you're doing within the context of your business unit, and then collectively the entire organization functions at a level greater than the sum of its parts.
And thank you, Scott. And my whole point is that with more transparency, you can reach optimization. And I actually don't believe, and I'd love to get your take on this, optimization doesn't mean you're being the most efficient.
No, I mean optimization just means that you're maximizing your performance and your contributions to the way that enhances patient outcomes.
But that doesn't mean that it's always the most efficient. And that's the whole point I'm getting at. There's a difference between optimization and efficiency.
Sure.
But we use the word efficiency. Now we're using optimization.
Right.
I'm just trying to make sure that, look, during these very uncertain times, which by the way, I think we're living in the most, opportunistic time in modern history. I mean, we language matters. And my whole point is that when I was on the phone, just a little bit off topic here, but it'll come back. I was on the phone with uh, a marketing executive yesterday, and they said, you know where people are now? They hear an opinion, they hear a point of view, and they start in the wrong place. It's always about what's wrong with things. What's wrong with things. It's never about looking at it as the opportunity or looking at it as a moment to learn. I don't think anybody would disagree with that to a certain point. And it's the same thing here. I mean, we can say that we want to optimize. We can use this language, but if I don't know how that relates to my contribution, but also to the contribution of other people, then it's difficult to find inclusion because if we're constantly thinking that for me to win, someone has to lose, it takes us back to where we started business. Unfortunately, that's the way that a lot of organizations have unknowingly created their operation. It's like it's all about competition, which I'm all about competition. It's healthy. But unless we understand the bigger macro issues, even in our own domain, as you said, I think that allows us to take ownership in a way that isn't just empowering, but one that's intellectually driven as well. Because we have to know what the consequences of our actions are, not just based on a set of things that we're told to do, but because we understand the strategic imperatives that we actually have the ability to influence. I don't know if you have any comments around that, Scott.
Yeah, no, and I think what you're saying, has relevance, and I think how I would apply that is you want people to be empowered, as you said, to be able to make those decisions that, again, optimize the outcomes for your patients. To your point of efficiency, yes, it may be the most efficient to discharge a patient or to provide a certain service, but if doing it differently would optimize their outcome, then that's where the level of empowerment and accountability comes into play. And I think that's incredibly important in today's environment because yes, we want to abide and we want to make sure that we're doing the best we can to be efficient, to be effective, to be cost effective, but we also need to have the safety and the empowerment to make a decision to say, you know what, but this is in the best interest of my patient at this moment, and this is what I'm going to do. And there needs to be that respect.
Why did I go there?
I don't
Because
know, Glenn. You tell me.
I'm going to tell you because when we were talking about nurses and caregivers and being patient centered and empowering the people at the bedside, and you said we need to be more vocal about doing what's right. We can say those things, but now what you and I have done have given people some direction on actually how to go about it. It's like, in other words, you did it to optimize. And in all the things that we discuss, we did it because it was in the best interest of what was happening in that moment in time. And why is that important? Because something that happens in that moment in time is truly about personalization, not always standardization. Because if something is hyper standardized, that doesn't mean that you're doing what's in the best interest of an individual, whether it's an employee or a patient. It means you're doing something that you've been told to do a certain way for years.
Sure.
But when you are doing what's right in that moment in time, it's something that is more intimate and something that we see through an entirely different lens. So anyway, I don't know how your take on that, but I
No,
wanted to just share that, sometimes we talk about things, and this is what my job is here as the host is let's take all that great knowledge that you're bringing, and then through this dialogue, we could actually help people take steps.
sure. But what you just summarized, Glenn, takes is a cultural transformation, and one that's not easily under implemented. And so you have to create a culture to allow people to be able to behave in that fashion and balance. It's always a balance, Glenn, right? Between standardization and personalization. I think standards and best practice are incredibly important, especially today with the amount of knowledge that comes out and the ability to keep up with that. So there's tremendous value in guidelines and best practice and standards and consistency, but it has to be balanced by knowing when those standards and best practice should be followed, but also when you have the ability, right? Now it's the art, not necessarily the science, it's the art of being a caregiver, a nurse, a physician, an advanced practice clinician, whoever you are, to now take that standard and now personalize it because the circumstances call for it. And you have to create a culture that embraces that approach. Because the one thing that I will tell you is that the cumulative effect of personalizing those decisions for better outcomes will elevate the performance of the organization.
So you just nicely transitioned us to this hot topic around burnout. I mean, you know that burnout amongst healthcare professionals is an urgent challenge.
Yes.
Scott, what do you think needs to change in our environments to support the well-being of our employees, our caregivers, while preserving dignified, high-quality care? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it just starts with reflecting and getting back to that dignity, right? Respecting our caregivers for their calling in which they came into this profession. And I think part of it, or at least the start, is just relieving and eliminating, or at least attempting to eliminate the administrative burdens that we place on our care providers today. The regulatory compliance with documentation, the use, the reliance on EMR, all of the requirements that our physicians and our providers are expected to deliver on. I'm not saying again that we shouldn't abide by them, but there has to be better ways to achieve those outcomes by still preserving the sanctity of why a physician went into this calling, why a nurse went into the calling. So we have to eliminate the administrative burden and waste. And we also have to, really, again, allow people to work at the highest degrees of their license and really leverage the expertise that our caregivers have and can provide to their patients and to each other by creating and leveraging team approaches, right? Building those teams and leveraging everybody's expertise in the contribution to the outcomes of their patient and not having the burden lay on one individual. So it's team-based approach, it's administrative burdens, and then at the end of the day, it's really about, again, allowing people to practice and incorporate that personalization and respect the sanctity of that personalization between a caregiver and that patient. Because at the end of the day, that is truly why we went into this occupation called healthcare.
Well, doesn't this come back to like seeing and knowing the people you're working with? I mean, look, I know that there's a lot of people that have a lot of tenure in healthcare, and but that doesn't mean that as times get tough, we have to treat people differently. Um, I think it's also a time for us to say, wait a second, what matters to my people today, given the dynamics in society that have changed, that maybe I'm not in touch with? Because at the end of the day, if we don't see and know our people for what matters to them today versus what may have mattered to them 12 months ago, I mean, this is a constant dynamic that's happening with people, and we have this tendency to see people as we've always known them, rather than see how they evolve over time, and we make the assumptions about what we think matters to them. So, what can I'll put back in your shoes as a physician executive? What can we do as an executive who maybe hasn't taken the time to see and know their people as they should? And what's the first step they can take?
Just get out and engage with your organization, from everybody from the C-suite down to the bedside. Get to know the challenges and the struggles that they're dealing with, and create an environment where they're able to articulate those challenges and struggles. There's a big difference between listening and hearing. You can listen to people, Glenn, but are they truly being heard? And I think as a leader, we just need to spend more time engaging and inviting people to have those conversations about the challenges that they're facing, and about solutions. There's one thing that I always held dear to is, I'm all for you bringing me a problem and presenting a problem and a challenge, but bring me a solution, or at least recommend a potential solution. You're in the trenches, as they say, right? You're at the bedside. You're at the point of care. What do you think are best practices that we can do as an organization? And as a leader, I see myself as a facilitator. So when people bring those solutions, then what are the barriers that I can remove in order to implement? Now, I may not be able to recognize or implement every single solution that somebody brings to you, but when that happens, when somebody brings a solution and it actually becomes implemented, the magic, it's infectious. The magic can happen because now, like we talked about earlier, now people are invested. Now they have that dignity. They have that sense of worth because now they contributed, to the benefit of the organization. If I could also, though, go back something that we talked about a little earlier, Glenn, is, when we talked about how do we deliver, care and getting to know, each other. I also think we need to start breaking down some barriers of communication between the stakeholders within healthcare. And what do I mean by that, Glenn? I think we need to have much more dialogue between the providers of care, the payers of care, and the receivers of care. We don't have enough discussion between physicians and the payers. We don't have enough discussion between leaders of hospitals and health systems with leaders of payers, whether it be government agencies or commercial entities. And then let's not forget the patient. Let's bring those patients in, to advisory boards and councils, and what's their input into how things can be done, from their perspective, more, to your earlier point, more efficiently, more effectively. So I do think we have to break down some communication barriers, not only within our organizations, but I'd like to be bold to say that we have to go outside our organizations to understand the challenges that our multiple stakeholders are facing, so that we can have some collective solutions on how to begin making change.
Forgive me, Scott, I have to ask the question. Do we even know how to do that?
Well, look, it just starts with an outreach, and it starts with a gesture of hey, I'm interested in having this conversation. I want to understand, what's your perspective. Let me hear the challenges that you face as a payer, and let a payer come in and what do you face day to day when you're when you're in closed doors with a patient. What are the challenges? What are the barriers you're facing, and how can we work collectively? That might be pie in the sky. I'll put it out there, but I think it's something that we should at least consider.
Scott, it's not pie in the sky. It's a non-negotiable. And the reason I asked the question, do we know how? Because these are things that we haven't historically done that are required now. And rather than hold on to what you know, rather than letting go and admitting that you don't know, I'm not talking about you, but in general, I mean, this is where the change begins. And, we have all these forums for conferences, to have all these discussions. And again, we always identify challenges, but we don't go into how to bring this new thinking and these new opportunities to life. So I'm in welcoming and inviting everyone who's listening to this discussion
Yeah.
to think about what's that first step that they can take to start creating more collaboration. Because if it's happening in your system, it's happening in others. If it's challenges are happening with reimbursement, it's happening with others. So these problems just accumulate over time, and then it affects an entire industry, it affects patients, it affects families. So I think back to what you said earlier, uh, being more inclusive in how we tackle and begin to confront what are opportunities and view them as such, I think can get us to a point where we can start minimizing a lot of these barriers that can oftentimes become self-inflicted.
Yeah. No, and look, Glenn, it just starts with an outreach and a conversation and a relationship. I might be old fashioned, but my father always used to teach me, that a relationship starts with a firm handshake, and eye contact. And so, I think we just need to do more of that. I think we're over reliant on technology, on Zoom, on texting, on emails. You know, just an old fashioned conversation, reaching out, saying, "Hey, you know what? I'd love to spend an hour to talk to you about, what are your barriers? What are your challenges? How can we begin to work together?" Within a community, and I think that's a start. And Glenn, if I may, I think you're well poised to actually help with that, because you are a wonderful convener of people, and think about the power of bringing health system leaders and payer leaders and representatives from health and human services and departments of health from a particular community together and offer a forum for dialogue. How powerful would that be?
Well, it's as powerful as people will take action. And I share all this because going back to you saying, well, I may be old-fashioned. No, this actually comes back to the metaphor. It's you were taught something a certain way, and you've stuck to it, and that's why you are the unique, distinct, and special person that you are. But there's a lot of people that learned things the old-fashioned way with noble intention, and then it veered away because other things got involved,
Yeah.
and they themselves created environments that then impacted other people's dignity because they veered off rather staying true to who they are.
Yeah, it's very true. And though getting back, no, it is. But getting back, it goes back to your original analogy. The headwinds that we're facing in healthcare today are sometimes can appear insurmountable, but you just have to break it down bit by bit, step by step, and the first step is taking that first step. It's that first action, and once you start it, it becomes infectious, and people, because when you share that level of discomfort with others, that level of discomfort becomes diminished, because now you have others that are sharing in that, and now it's actually becoming comfortable.
Well, if you don't mind, Scott, I'm going to go back to something that I shared earlier with you. And maybe this is a bit, well, it's not inappropriate. I'm going to read something that I posted on LinkedIn yesterday that defines your point. I said, being courageous is something we all admire, but when the moment comes to embody it, we often hesitate rather than face our fears. I felt inspired to write this post based on a recent conversation with a senior executive. They told me that my modern approach to leadership in today's age of personalization felt complicated, but after listening to them for 10 minutes, I kindly asked, is it complicated or does it just make you feel discomfort? They paused And in that moment, they were courageous enough to confront their fears. And this is the whole point, that when we feel discomfort, we can't blame others. We need to own it and take action. And I think that what this entire conversation has been about is, if we're as purposeful as we think we are, um, we have to have the courage to keep that noble intention alive, because a lot of people would say that maybe we've lost some of that in healthcare, when in the end, we need more of it today than ever before, which then takes us to my final question as we wrap this up, Scott, and you've been excellent today. What are the qualities that you believe define exceptional leadership in healthcare?
Well, that's a great question, Glenn, and thank you for asking. I think true transformational leaders, they lead they lead with a level of inclusion, a level of engagement. They inspire people and they empower people to perform at levels beyond their own expectations. They're giving them the freedom and the safety to express ideas, and they respect their individuality. I call it the funnel of innovation. When you create a culture of safety where people are free to present, solutions and opportunities, it creates this incredible funnel of innovation where you can evaluate. Now, I'm not saying that every idea like I said earlier, becomes executed and implemented, but you have this tremendous funnel that out of at the end comes some new and innovative ways of doing things. So, I think today's leaders or innovative leaders, transformational leaders, really embody those characters and those characteristics. And I think if to your point, if they hold true, because believe me, everybody in healthcare wakes up with that moral compass of doing what's right and serving patients and being servant leaders. But we just get distracted by these other headwinds. And so I think, to answer your question, I think true transformational leaders embody the spirit of personalization. They embody the spirit of respect and dignity in its foundational level. And when it's done, the magic happens, and the outcomes, which at the end of the day are all around patient care, are truly achievable.
Scott, you're an inspiration. I don't think that anybody who's been watching and listening to this can say that you haven't uh, resembled those very qualities that you just mentioned about leadership, and who you are, and what you stand for. So thank you again for bringing your wisdom, your passion, and just your genuine care for an industry that needs more leaders like you. Appreciate your time, Scott. Really, really do. Thank you so
Uh,
much
the,
for joining us today.
the honor and privilege is all mine, Glenn, and thank you so much for your kind words.
And as we leave every show, when you lead in the age of personalization, you will see things that others don't. Do what others won't, and keep pushing when prudence says quit. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Glenn.
Thanks for listening to Personalization Outbreak. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss a show. If you enjoyed the content, visit ageofpersonalization.com to check out our free streaming video series and learn how to get involved in the movement. I'm Glenn Llopis. I wish you a good day, and remember, without strategy, change is merely substitution, not evolution.